Hi boys and girls, it's Miss Villalobos here. Today's read aloud is Demeter and Persephone. As you have learned, the ancient Greeks believed that there were many gods and goddesses responsible for the workings of the world. There was Poseidon, the god of the sea, Ares, the god of war, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love, to name a few. Demeter was the goddess of the harvest in agriculture or farming. It was because of her the ancient Greeks believed that fruits hung heavy on the trees, wheat grew in the fields, and vegetables ripened on the ground. Demeter had a daughter named Persephone, who was the joy of her life. Persephone was known by all the gods and goddesses on Mount Olympus as a beautiful girl, just like her mother, and like her mother, she was full of happiness, warmth, and light. As long as the two of them were together, it was summer year-round. Some days, Demeter would take Persephone with her to tend to the crops in the fields. On these days, Demeter would work among the crops, and Persephone would play in a nearby field picking bouquets of flowers. One such day, Persephone strayed farther and farther away from her mother until, humming a little tune, Persephone was far out of Demeter's sight. Now, Persephone was not just known by the gods and goddesses of Mount Olympus. Hades, Zeus's brother and the god of the underworld, had also taken notice of her. As god of the underworld, Hades lived underground and oversaw all the souls of the dead. He and his three-headed dog, Cerberus, saw to it that none of the dead escaped back to the land of the living. Hades had fallen in love with Persephone, and the king of the underworld wanted to make her his queen. On that day, as Persephone drifted away from her mother, Hades harnessed his 4 black horses to his golden chariot. As Persephone bent to pick one last flower, she could hear the faint sounds of hooves beating. Persephone stood up and looked around. As she did, Hades tore open the ground that separated the underworld from the land of the living and grabbed Persephone. He spirited her away back to the underworld in his chariot. As the sun began to set, Demeter finally stopped her work in the fields. "Persephone!" she called out, ready to take her daughter home. There was no answer. Thinking that perhaps Persephone had not heard her, she called out again, "Persephone!" Demeter heard nothing but the chirps of evening crickets, and then she began to worry. Demeter searched all night calling for her daughter, but no matter where she looked or how loudly she called, she could not find Persephone. As the night wore on, Demeter began to look older. Wrinkles formed on her face, her body grew crooked, and she moved more and more slowly. By the time the sun came up the next day, Demeter was no longer full of happiness, warmth, and light, but was a bent old woman. In her night of searching, Demeter had not found Persephone, and so she turned to the sun god, Helios, who during the day sees all, and asked for help. "Oh, Helios," Demeter said, "have you seen my daughter Persephone? Do you know where she has gone?" "Hades has taken her down to the underworld to be his queen," Helios replied. Upon hearing this, Demeter began to despair. How was she to ever retrieve her daughter now? Demeter began to weep for her lost daughter, and in her sadness she forgot to tend to the crops in the fields. The grass turned brown, the wheat stopped growing, and soon there was no more food on the earth for the animals and people to eat. Every tree, vine, and field was bare. Even the gods received no more offerings, for the people did not have any food or meat to spare. After some time, Zeus saw that the people would starve if something was not done. Only gods and goddesses could go to the underworld and then leave. So Zeus traveled to the underworld to persuade Hades to let Persephone go. "Hades," he said, "if you do not return Persephone to her mother, Demeter, nothing will grow on the earth again. The people will starve." "I will gladly return her," Hades said, "if she hasn't eaten anything. You know the rule, Zeus. Whoever eats the food of the underworld or drinks of its water must stay forever." Zeus and Hades looked at Persephone, waiting for an answer. Had she eaten the food of the underworld? Persephone began to cry. "I ate 6 pomegranate seeds," she said. A rule was a rule, but Zeus knew that if Persephone remained in the underworld, nothing would grow on the earth again. So he made a deal with Hades. "For each seed she has eaten, Persephone will stay 1 month in the underworld as your queen. For the rest of the year, however, she will live on earth with her mother, Demeter." And so it was that for 6 months of the year, Demeter and Persephone were happy together. Fruits, wheat, and other plants sprouted from the ground, and it was spring. As they grew bountifully, the world was bright and it was summer. During those 6 months that Persephone lived in the underworld, however, Demeter would ignore all the crops on earth and would pine or long to have her daughter. The leaves would fall off the trees in autumn and would be bare in winter, while Demeter longed for her daughter. Once Persephone was returned to Demeter, it would be spring again. The end. Thanks for listening, boys and girls. I hope you enjoyed this read aloud of Demeter and Persephone. Until next time, bye!